And I will say that if you guys have if you have an overarching question, hold that for the end. But if you have a question about specific content on a slide, you can try to indicate that in some way. I'll try to keep an eye out for that. But for the most part, if you have like a kind of a complex or question that just relates to the subject matter in general, you could hold that for the end. All right, then let's get going. So for carrying capacity, I'm not sure what definitions you guys have looked at for that, but an important concept for myself is that carrying capacity there's different definitions out there, and so there's ecological carrying capacity. There's also cultural carrying capacity. So for ecological carrying capacity, I'd imagine that's what you've learned about thus far. And that's the natural limit of a population set by resources in a particular environment. And there's many different definitions, just a sample. Kind of an important subset on that is cultural carrying capacity. And so that's really the population size tolerated by society. And as a wildlife biologist, a wildlife manager, that is a large portion of what I have to understand and also kind of help the state work through. Really, my job is to understand the population and clearly communicate that information to the general society. Because in North America, wildlife resources are managed and trust largely by states for the general public, for society. So we all own the wildlife resources, not just one person. And ultimately, cultural carrying capacity, what does society want, plays a large role in how those populations are managed or reacted to. So jumping into the moose population, this is kind of just a rough graph of moose population change over time in recent history. Before colonization occurred in the Northeast and in North America, there were accounts of moose being abundant in the area, but specific numbers on that certainly not available. So this is kind of the time window from when we have specific numbers. 1900, the area was still largely influenced by that first wave of colonization at that time, and much of what is now forest was actually farmland, and at that time there was also subsistence hunting was very prevalent, and moose are a large, source of meat that is readily available to go out and hunt. And so, the forced removal as well as widespread subsistence hunting for moose drove that population very low about 1900. I think it was really only estimated there were only a handful of moose left in Coos County, northernmost Coos County. So from about 1900 to 1980 was this kind of the slow population building. The population in 1900 was protected from subsistence hunting and essentially a closed season. And then, we see a large increase, and now in recent years, we've been seeing decrease. And so just really quickly, 1900 to 1980, that was when a lot of those farmlands were reverting back to forest from agriculture. And this isn't true for, let's say, the most mountainous parts of the White Mountains or some parts of Coos County, but much of New Hampshire had this trend. And so then from about 1980, even until current, that forest has matured, and consequently there is a lot of forest harvest going on that creates optimal habitat. So really, one of the limiting factors for moose is the abundance of browse. And so when a mature forest is harvested, you then get regenerating forest, and that creates browse for moose. At the same time, beaver abundance also rebounded, and another component that's helpful for moose but not critical is having small wetlands, and beavers create these in really close proximity to a lot of browse. So that created this really optimal habitat, and from about 1970 to 2000, New Hampshire's moose population just exploded. Really good conditions, really healthy moose population skyrocketed. From 2000 today, we've been seeing this steady decline. And so, what we're really experiencing is density-dependent factors catching up with that population. Populations can't grow exponentially indefinitely. So these are the factors the regulating factors on that population that are kind of catching up with it. And in large part, it is parasitism due to winter ticks here in New Hampshire. And so that's what we're going to talk a lot about today, and how that fits in with the population dynamics of this population. So, cause of moose population is chronically high infestations of winter ticks on moose, resulting in low productivity. And what I mean by productivity, that is the number of calves born per adult cow moose over a specific period of time, typically 1 year, and then low calf survival. So for calf survival, when we talk about a calf moose, that's a moose 1 year and less. And so moose are born approximately May 15th. And so we're talking about the major windows for where calves are less likely to survive or within their first 8 weeks of life, which is neonate survival. And then when they're 10 to 12 months old, so in late winter, and that's when they're susceptible to winter tick-related mortality. And so essentially, we have a declining population because we have fewer births and then we have more deaths. So just kind of simple interactions on population dynamics there. And so a term you're going to hear me use a lot today is a term called an epizootic. And I define this a little wrong. So an epizootic is a general term that relates to some sort of disease outbreak that occurs widespread in a population and affects a wide distribution of individuals. A winter tick epizootic is what we define as a year with widespread high infestations of winter ticks on moose throughout the region, resulting in low late winter calf survival and adult cow productivity. So it's pretty much years with high winter tick infestations resulting in low productivity by adult cows and low calf survival in that late winter when those calves are 10 to 12 months old. So the winter tick life cycle. It's important to note that winter ticks are a different species of tick than you and I typically get on us. So they, the ticks we typically encounter on us are the black-legged tick and the American dog tick, which have multiple year life cycles and multiple host life cycles. Winter ticks, they have a one host, 1 year life cycle. So let's just start in the upper right-hand corner there. May to August, winter ticks are eggs in the duff layer. And then September to November, and so in late August and early September, those eggs hatch and they become larvae, and the larvae ascend the vegetation, and those clumps actually are not eggs. Those are actually tiny ticks, larval stage ticks, and they form these clumps of hundreds, and they're on the vegetation there waiting for a moose or some other kind of animal to brush up against them, at which time they get on the moose, get on that animal, and then embed, make a blood meal. And then from really, whenever they get on that animal in the fall through to March, they stay on them all winter. So you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, I don't know, can you see my cursor? Yes, no? Yeah, so those are larval winter ticks on a moose skin. And then here, this picture is a cross-section of a moose hide. So this is the moose hair, this is the moose skin, this is like the meat, the muscle. And in that line you can see are all adult winter ticks engorged, or not engorged, but embedded on that moose. It's pretty much a solid line of winter ticks. And so then in March and April, those adult female winter ticks engorge and they drop off. So here's at left-hand side there, those are engorged adult female winter ticks that fell off onto the bare ground. And so really some important things to keep in mind about this winter tick life cycle is that critical times for them, or critical components for them, are their ability to get on a host here, September through November, December, and then also when they fall off. Do they fall off onto bare ground or do they fall off onto snow? If they fall off onto snow, they're going to be in poorer condition and lay fewer eggs. If they fall onto bare ground, they're in better condition and lay more eggs. We'll kind of retouch on that concept here. So, and how do ticks kill moose? Well, really it's a numbers game. If a calf, and typically adults survive, but calves will die, and we're really talking about 30 to 90,000 winter ticks on a given moose. So it's really a numbers game and how that influences them, but we'll go through it. So moose, similar to deer and many ungulates, In the winter, they are eating hardwood browse. And so that hardwood browse is not, it just doesn't have a lot of a lot of nutrition, a lot of nitrogen, a lot of protein in it. And so moose are in declining condition in the winter. And this isn't something that it relates to poor quality habitat in New Hampshire. This is something that happens to moose in the best moose habitat. It's just a natural cycle for them. They put on fat in the fall because their natural food in the winter is less nutritious. They lose body weight in the winter, but typically have enough to make it through. So in late winter, they're in poor condition naturally due to low quality forage. Then you add on all these winter ticks, moose start grooming. That's less time feeding and energy expended grooming. Then in March and April, you also have adult female winter ticks engorging. And so each winter, adult female winter tick takes about 1 to 3 milliliters of blood. And so that results in tremendous blood loss. And so how do you replace blood is you need protein. So either in your diet or from your resources, you need to be able to have protein that you can catabolize that's then used as energy and creates new blood. So this results, and all this blood loss results in a protein deficiency. They don't have it in their diet, so it's coming from muscle. That results in anemia. Eventually, calves don't have enough resources and they run out of protein and they die. So it's a real, it's mostly a protein deficiency. In some cases, it can also be acute anemia, which is when you lose greater than 50% of your blood volume over a short period of time, and that results in just an acute response by the body and mortality. But mostly it's this loss of body condition, insufficient resources to meet that metabolic demand of replacing blood. And just to get a little technical on you, here's kind of how it breaks out metabolically. And so on this graph, so if you start at the left here on this chart, let me see if I can find mine. So this is the daily energy budget of a calf moose, January 15th. And so you can see this brown here, so this total bar is the amount of energy it needs every day. And so this brown portion here is the amount that it gets from its forage, from browse. And this lighter blue color, I seem to have lost my mouse here. Here it is the amount of energy that it's needing. It's the difference that it is then making by catabolizing its fat and protein. So, a calf moose only has so much fat and protein. Eventually it uses it all up. And so by April 1st, just for instance, in this calf, it's then switched over and it's catabolizing its protein. So it's losing muscle now to meet that daily energetic demand. Now come April and March, you add on this added energetic burden of winter ticks. That then means it's catabolizing even more protein. And that's when it essentially runs out and this protein deficiency kicks in and results in mortality. And so, a lot of what I talked about is it's really based on research done here in New Hampshire. So there was a large research project in 2002 to 2005 with many radio-collared moose in northern New Hampshire. And then in 2014 to 2018, we, in the same area, collared a bunch more moose. And so we were collaring calves and adults. And this gives us survival rates, productivity rates, much of what we use to base our understanding of what's going on with moose in New Hampshire on. And so in 2002 to 2005, there was an epizootic, so a year with high winter tick impact on that population, and widespread calf mortality and low adult cow productivity in 1 of 4 years. And so late winter calf survival was 67%. That population was considered, stable. In 2014 to 2018, there were epizootics 4 out of 5 years. Late winter calf survival was only 30%, and we had a declining population. So again, mortality increasing with higher winter tick infestations, frequency of epizootics. This one's a little more complicated. This is the energy budget for an adult cow moose, and I should say a pregnant adult cow moose. And so here it's the same. The brown is the energy that she is getting from forage, and the gray there is the energy met by fat or muscle. But on this, you can see the the metabolic demand of winter ticks here is in that pink, but also a pregnant adult cow is also dealing with the energetic demands of growing a fetus, gestation, which is the period when that fetus is growing in the womb. And that most of that energetic demand occurs in the last trimester of gestation, which occurs at the same time as well. So it's this added demand. Keep losing my mouse here. So anyhow, it's this impact of winter ticks. Often, an adult moose typically do not die from winter tick infestations. They have enough fat, enough muscle to meet that energetic demand. But what it does here is when you add on the cost of having a calf, it drives that adult cow to a lower nutritional plane. And so it takes her longer to recover to be in good enough condition to have a calf again. And, or there's what's called the selfish cow theory or kind of circumstance where that cow is driven due to the compounding influence of winter ticks and pregnancy, that cow is driven to such a poor nutritional condition that she shunts energy away from the calf in order for her to survive. And at which point, the calf is malnourished and then has lower survival. So this is why your productivity declines with these high winter tick infestations. And so here's what we've seen for productivity. We often talk about a calving rate, which is the number of calves born per adult cow in a given year. And then we also have what's called the successive calving rate. And I'll describe that in a minute. So again, 2002 to 2005, there was an epizootic in 1 of 4 years, and that population was stable. Calving rate was 85%, successive calving rate was 75%. And that successive calving rate is how many adult cows are having a calf in back-to-back years. So if you monitor a specific cow over 4 years, she was having a calf 3 out of the 4 years. In 2014, with higher winter tick impacts, fewer cows were having a calf each year, and similarly, it was taking, a cow was only having a calf on 1 of every 4 years, and that population was declining. So kind of takeaways are this is high winter tick infestations are resulting in generally unhealthy moose in New Hampshire. So we have this information on survival and productivity. And so this graph is a little complicated, the chart's a little complicated here. The red line there, you can largely disregard that. That is the population halving line from a specific time. And these numbers on here, that is relevant to our study area. So you should take those, that's not talking about the total moose population in New Hampshire. It's just specific to where we were working. So this graph shows, population trajectory for a number of different scenarios. Essentially what you have here is, so you have, 5 different models. Let me see if I can find my cursor there. So this black line on the bottom, that's model 1, and that's an epizootic every year. So you see this population coming down and essentially going down to near 0 by 2055. Model 2 is an epizootic every other year, which is largely what we've documented for the past 10 to 15 years. So that's this gradual decline and a population getting very low in 30 years. Population stability occurs when there's an epizootic 30% a year, so 3 out of 10. And then you start to see population increase when you have an epizootic in only 20% of years. And at that time, you're assuming lighter winter tick impacts, and so your productivity, your condition, and your output by adult cows starts to increase as well. And so in that Model 4 and Model 5, you see population increase over time. Now, with this dotted blue line and this dark black line, you can see that's gradual. Even though on most years, most of your calf moose are dying, that population isn't changing a whole lot for all that mortality. And that's because with moose, as with many large ungulates, the most influential parameters on the population trajectory are adult cow survival and then productivity. And then calf survival and bull survival have lower influence. And so that's why you'll have, an adult cow moose will live 10 to 20 years in most cases. And so it's not like they're just disappearing overnight. It's just going to be this gradual thing where you have moose in generally unhealthy condition. Now, these predictions with the population getting down here pretty low, they may not be realistic, and we'll kind of get into that here in a bit. So this is assuming that moose stay in poor condition out here. But a limiting factor for the winter tick population is, so it's one, the abundance of moose. So there has to be sufficient moose in an area to support high abundance of winter ticks in that area. And two, it's to have, ideal weather conditions where it has enough time to get on the moose in the fall, and then when it falls off, that winter tick is in good enough condition to lay eggs. So what are we looking at in the future? That population going down to near zero is unlikely, because at some point moose are going to, that moose abundance is going to get low enough that it's not going to be ideal for the winter tick life cycle. We will then start to see healthier moose. That population will start coming back, and it'll likely be a cyclic relationship. So here we have the moose population and the winter tick population. The moose is in blue, winter ticks in red, and that winter tick population is, lagging the moose population, as most host parasite relationships do. We're largely somewhere in here right now. We don't really know where, and it also depends on what part of the state you are in. But we have unhealthy moose that are declining, and we have high winter tick abundance. So frequent epizootics, and so it's due to sufficient moose, and it's also due to short winters. Our moose densities in New Hampshire are at or below the levels where in Canada winter ticks are largely not influencing that population. And so this is the interplay where we have shorter winters that are really ideal for the winter tick life cycle. And so winter ticks will be effective at lower moose density than they are in areas with climates that are less ideal for that winter tick cycle. So I could be getting confusing here. Feel free to ask questions at the end. And so then we're also going to be looking at a lower maximum moose density, right? So we have this climate that's ideal for winter ticks. They're going to respond to that moose population at a lower abundance of moose. And it's likely going to be something that cycles like this in the future, depending on moose abundance and, annual weather patterns, but the overall climate is going to hold our moose abundance lower than it was up here. So why high winter tick abundance now? And we've talked about this, but we have generally high abundance of moose on the landscape. And this is, moose are limited in core moose range. Moose are limited by the abundance of browse and also by predators. And so in the Northeast US and in Northern New England, there is substantial optimal browse for moose, likely more than what was historically present pre-colonization, and that's due to forest disturbance from logging. We've created really good moose habitat and lots of regenerating forest 4 to 16 years old. Additionally, there's minimal predation on this population. So for moose, predators in the Northeast, natural predators in the Northeast for moose are black bears, which will take moose neonates, so moose that are really only for in the first few weeks of life. And then the traditional predator for moose in North America is the gray wolf. And so historically that did occur in New Hampshire and in other parts of moose range where gray wolves occur, along with black bears. They exert substantial predation influence on that population and tend to hold it at lower abundance. So we do not have gray wolves. We do not have that predatory influence on this population. Additionally, we have a climate that is favorable for winter ticks here in the Northeast. So with climate change, we're seeing more frequent, shorter winters. And as discussed before, this allows more time for ticks to quest. So historically, from best we can tell, our winter tick questing season would end about November 11th or mid-November. And so what ends the winter tick questing season is lasting snowfall or sustained temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius. And so historically that occurred mid-November. In recent years, that's been coming later and later. And some years when we've seen really high winter tick impacts, we haven't had those conditions till sometime in December, where whereas traditionally, you know, November and December may not have been questing periods for winter ticks at all. So more time to get on moose. And then in March and April, you know, we tend to be melting snow off a little earlier. And so that's resulting in these winter ticks falling on bare ground, being in better condition, and laying more eggs. And so in this picture, there are actually some engorged adult female winter ticks. There's a couple there and one there. And actually, I was tracking a moose last winter, and it was a day when, you know, there was pretty much snow cover everywhere. But all of a sudden, there was these few patches of open ground on a south slope, and boom, there were the ticks in the open area. So they're hardy. Winter ticks are hardy and, you know, somewhat resourceful. So what are our management options? And I think you guys should note, I am not proposing that this is what we are doing or going to do in New Hampshire, but on a regional scale, you know, moose are managed in New Hampshire, but we collaborate with those in Maine and Vermont, New York, and even Canada as well. And so what are our options for dealing with this moose winter tick dynamic? And so right now, you know, we are, and this is a comparison of conservative and liberal harvest. And so right now, this is what our population is doing. It's, you know, this prolonged decline until some sort of a threshold down here where there's not enough moose for winter ticks to be effective. We'll see healthy moose, that population will start coming back. And so, you know, that's an option, and really in that option, you're just either saying, hey, we're going to stand by and watch this population, or you're hoping that our weather pattern changes. An alternative that we can do that we know will be effective is to rapidly reduce the moose population through regulated hunting, and then we will get to healthy moose faster. But the caveat with that is that, you know, to have healthy moose, you're going to need far fewer moose than people are used to seeing. And so that really relates back to the graph that we had seen, and that where we are, you know, our population expanded very quickly. And where we were in about 2000 with a whole lot of moose in the state was not likely a realistic level to maintain long term. And so we're going to have a new normal to deal with. And that new kind of carrying capacity and ecological factors influencing the population. So really in New Hampshire right now, our approach on moose management is one, education. So, you know, what are the factors influencing our population, and then trying to describe that to folks. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to explain this today. And that really goes back to the premise of how moose are managed and wildlife are managed in North America. These are resources held by the public and managed for the public by state and federal agencies. And then, you know, in hand with that, monitor biological attributes. So we currently still have a moose harvest. With those harvested moose, we get a lot of information from them. We count the winter ticks on them. We get their weight, which relates to their body condition. We also get other measures that indicate pregnancy. And so while we're still harvesting moose, we're getting as much data as we can and using that to understand the impact of winter ticks. And then also we are continuing to work with the University of New Hampshire in monitoring this population and at what moose density are winter tick impacts low. And that's an important thing, you know, that's a unique situation by area. And that is due to the impact of weather, right? So it's pretty well known where winter tick impacts are low in Canada, but here in the Northeast US, that's not really known. And even within New Hampshire, the different part of New Hampshire, there seem to be different levels based on that winter length. So it's having a better understanding of that and through monitoring. All right, and so a key parameter of that is knowing how many moose you have in a given area. So for moose abundance, and so how do we measure moose abundance in New Hampshire? Well, I guess, you know, so first I'll describe, on the right there is moose density by management region. And so in moose, we clump areas together as management regions based on climate, based on habitat. And generally what you see is your highest moose abundance in northern New Hampshire, declining through the north region and then through the White Mountains region, lower yet in central, and lowest in southeast. And this is in part due to habitat. In the White Mountains in north, we have northern hardwoods, which is ideal habitat for moose. And then down in the central and southern parts of the state, it's more oak pines, a little less ideal browse for them. So that's our general understanding of the moose population. How do we come about that? So from 1998 to 2000, the state ran aerial infrared surveys in the northern part of moose range. So they flew circular routes over specific areas with a forward-looking aerial infrared imaging system. And so this is a little bit more recent work you'll see using these graphics, but essentially they were looking with this infrared camera in a plane over thoroughly flying a given area and detecting moose, taking both pictures and images and verifying that those were moose. And so essentially they had a total count of moose for an area. At the same time, they asked deer hunters to record the number of moose they saw that season, the number of, and then by age and sex. And so the bull, cows, and calf ratios as well. And then that was related to those specific areas where those aerial surveys were done. So essentially what we do is we use this deer hunter survey form, and that is then related to the total number of moose in an area with a simple equation. And this allows us an index to track the population over time and a population estimate that has somewhere around 20 to 25% variance or error in it. So no population estimation method is, exactly precise, and it's really all a trade-off of how much time and resources are you going to spend on that, is what kind of accuracy do you need in managing your population. And so just, here's literature on some of the stuff that I've mentioned, and then we'll move on to questions. I guess I'll open it up for questions. And are there other aspects of the relationship that you'd like me to talk more about, or other aspects of population dynamics of wildlife that are of interest?
You answered my question already. I had it early in the presentation. Like, if the abundance of ticks is it just normal that it happens cyclically, or is it because of climate change? And you answered that.
Yeah. And I know that you mentioned you guys have discussions about management options, and so an interesting thing is that New Hampshire is going to face over the next few years is that what is our role in managing this population? Is it conservative harvest, or is it really trying to manage for healthy moose? It seems like society wants more moose, but they want healthy moose as well. And so given that climate change and abundance of moose are factors that are influenced by people, what is our role in therefore affecting the health of the population?
And how is it decided?
So really we operate under what are called or what is a big game management plan, and so that runs a 10-year period, and that's a comprehensive planning document that's developed every 10 years, and the next one is 2026 to 2035. And so in preparing that document, we hold many public hearings and do public surveys, both phone and mail, to provide the management options that are viable for this population, and then to understand what social desire is for those viable options. And so kind of where we're at right now is understanding what are the viable options, and then in the next few years we're going to be reaching out to the public as to, okay, what do people value more? Kind of a very conservative approach, or do they really dislike seeing moose influenced by winter ticks and want to have way fewer but way healthier moose? And I guess, I think something that would be of value is if I go back all the way almost to the start of the presentation. Okay, so this graph here, so this is our trajectory of moose population. An important point that I kind of neglected to make is that our history of abundant moose, of recent abundant moose in New Hampshire, it's relatively recent. You know, it's about 40 years. And so what we're seeing right now is really probably that population working out what is equilibrium for the current habitat and for the current weather. And what we kind of talked about was that the population would, you know, it's probably going to peak. And then I don't know if you've talked about populations that overshoot carrying capacity, but this could be, you know, an example of that. So we overshot carrying capacity. We have animals that are in poor condition, our population's coming down, and in the future we're likely to see it be cyclical, but also depend on our management approach. So yeah.
Yeah, we've definitely looked at graphs like that, so that's perfect.
Okay,
Or like
great.
predator prey graphs that looks very similar to your parasite graphs.
Right, yeah. Winter ticks are kind of acting as they are acting as a predator here in New Hampshire, so in a unique way.
Yeah, great. Do you guys, I know it's almost lunchtime, but do you all have any questions before we take off? No one?
Yeah. Is there something that like your group is doing to like make the population of the ticks less?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, a question I get often. You know, essentially, is there anything we can do to make for fewer winter ticks? And oftentimes people ask about spraying, spraying some sort of insecticide or treating moose with some sort of insecticide. And we are not currently doing anything. And so currently the approach we were taking on that is we were researching what options are out there and available for either treating moose so that ticks are less influential on them, or treating the landscape, you know, with some sort of insecticide. And right now, there are not options that we would feel comfortable endorsing. And so when you start talking about spraying the climate, you know, the landscape for a natural insect like the winter tick, you have, you know, cascading effects of that manipulation on, let's say, other things that you can't anticipate. And so that's something to be approached with real caution. And as far as treating individual moose, you know, a challenge with wildlife management is that it's very rare that you have access to a large proportion of that population. And putting a collar on or treating every moose would just be, it's not logistically feasible. And additionally, as best I know, there are not options that would work. Actually, there's research going on in Quebec where they have radio-marked moose, and they have been trying to treat them with some of the products that we treat, let's say, dogs with. And they were trying something new this past winter, but to date, they had not found a product that was working yet. And that was partly due to moose have a very thick hide, they have very long hair, as well as some fat underneath it. It results in a different kind of substrate for those insecticides than, let's say, on a dog. So yeah, great question. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really good question, Lexi. Thanks.